Hello. I'm going to continue now my read through of my book, The Baha'i Faith, A Short History. We're still on the section on the Bābī religion, and we've reached chapter 4, Conflict and Collapse, 1848-1853. As before, I've divided this into two separate videos for ease of recording. In the first part of this chapter, I briefly discussed the radicalization of Babism and the situation by 1848 in which the Bābī movement had become well established across a large part of Iran, and the clerics had become extremely antagonistic towards the Babis and instigated a number of attacks on them, and the Babis themselves now acknowledged the Bab as the Mahdi, and many of them were more confrontational in their response to the situation. And into that brew, you then have the raising of the Black Standard, which is a Messianic symbol, in July 1848 by Mullah Hussein in Khorasan in the northeast of Iran, and he then begins a march to the west with a growing band of followers who are armed, whether for self-defense or whatever, we don't know. Okay, let me now resume my read-through. In the event, the Babis became mired in conflict. After several months in which the government had seemed close to collapse, Muhammad Shah died in September 1848. For a time, the complete breakdown of the country into civil war seemed likely, and the crown prince was rushed from Tabriz to take the throne. In this confused situation, the Babis under Mullah Hussein tried to enter Qudus's home city of Barfaroush near the Caspian Sea, but were attacked and several of their number slain. Retaliating forcefully, they repulsed their opponents, killing many. They then withdrew to the small shrine of Sheikh Tabarsi, which they fortified. Other Babis joined them until their numbers reached perhaps 500 or 600 men. Sources give quite different figures. Enduring a 7-month siege, from October 1848 through to May 1849, the defenders of Tabarsi withstood repeated attacks by first local and then central government forces. Their sacrificial dedication often terrified their opponents, enabling them to withstand greatly superior numbers. But finally, worn down by starvation and cannon fire, they responded to the false offer of a truce and were massacred. As with the march, the Babis' struggle at Tabarsi should be seen primarily in terms of religious motivations. The defenders' zeal was sustained by religious dedication and their sense of identity with the sacrificial sufferings borne by the companions of the Imam Hussein. Like them, they might die as martyrs, but their deaths would witness to God's truth, as would their struggle against the forces of unbelief. This was a reenactment of the passion drama of Karbala, where the Imam Hussein had been killed, a mighty proof of the truth of the Bab's call for all true Shi'is. The events of 1850. Stunning as the events of Tabarsi were, and many of the Babis' opponents also interpreted the struggle as a new Karbala, the conflict itself represented a massive blow to the Babis' logistical strength. Many Babi leaders, including Mullah Hussein and Qudus, and several others of the Letters of the Living, had been killed during or immediately after the conflict, and so too had many of the most active of the rank and file. A period of quiescence followed, and it seems likely that many of the Babis, including the Bab himself, were in a state of shock at the extent of their losses. Effective coordination of the movement undoubtedly became more difficult. Thus, it was not until the earlier months of 1850 that there were again signs of Babi activity. There were confused disturbances in the southern city of Yazd following Vahid's proclamation of the Bab's call there, and in Tehran 7 eminent Babis were arrested and executed, including the Bab's uncle, who had been his guardian. This latter episode was probably an attempt by the new government, led by the forceful Mirza Taqi Khan as chief minister to the youthful Nasiru'd-din Shah, to intimidate the Babis in the capital, allegations of a Babi conspiracy against the government notwithstanding. There was a further lull until May 1850, when 2 upheavals began, in the northern city of Zanjan and the southern town of Nevis. In both cases, there were exceptionally large local concentrations of Babis, led by a local notable, Hujat and Vahid, respectively. Local tensions and rivalries seem to have been involved in generating conflict between the Babis and their opponents, with a rapid escalation of events leading to what were in effect urban civil wars. Once fighting commenced, the Babis were at first able to defy local and government forces with a fervour that was daunting to their opponents, but they were then worn down by the enemy's superiority in weaponry, eventually accepting the pledge of a truce to end the fighting, as at Tabarsi the government forces broke their solemn pledge and massacred or enslaved the Babi's survivors. Of the 2 struggles, that at Nevis, initially with 1,500 Babis, almost half the town's population, was the shorter, ending within a month. At Zanjan, with 3,000 Babis in a city of 20,000 inhabitants, by contrast, the conflict continued for 8 months, until January 1851. Zanjan was also notable for the presence of women amongst the Babi combatants and the establishment of local government structures by the local Babi leadership, including the issuing of coinage. Faced with this fresh evidence of the power of the Babis, Mirza Taqi Khan determined to deprive the movement of its central focus and inspiration. In opposition to the views of other members of the Qajar elite, he ordered the execution of the Bab. Accordingly, the Bab was again brought to Tabriz, and on the 8th or 9th of July 1850, shot in front of a large crowd of onlookers. The event was remarkable. An entire regiment of soldiers faced the Bab and one of his disciples, who were tied together and suspended from a wall. A first regiment of Armenian Christians, presumably aimed to miss, reluctant, no doubt, to shed the blood of a holy man, and the Bab and his companion were unscathed. A second Muslim regiment was then summoned, and they completed the task. The strangeness of these events ensured that even in death, the Bab's aura of holiness was preserved. Cast into a ditch, the bodies of the Bab and his disciple were later carried away by one of the Babis. This, by the way, is a portrait of Mirza Taqi Khan, Amir Kabir, the chief minister to Nasiru'd-din Shah when he first became ruler. This is a general view of the Barrack Square in Tabriz, where the Bab was shot. After the events of 1850 and the final extinction of the Babi resistance at Zanjan in January 1851, there was then a further lull. Our knowledge of what the Babis were actually doing during this time is extremely sketchy. The nominal leader of the movement following the Bab's execution was Mirza Yahya Nouri, but now better known by his title Subh Azal, Mourner of Eternity. The nature of his position is open to dispute and subject to conflicting retrospective interpretations by his own followers and those of his elder half-brother Baha'u'llah. Although appointed by the Bab to act as leader after him, it seems that he was little more than a figurehead. Certainly, he was very young, still in his teens, inexperienced and reclusive, and was unable to maintain the dynamism or cohesion of the Babis. Indeed, with their founder and most of their leaders now dead, and faced with the continuing threat of persecution by both the religious and secular authorities, the Babis led a secret and shadowy existence. Many no doubt distanced themselves from the movement or abandoned it altogether. The active remnant divided into different factions, often centering on the claims made to some new spiritual authority by certain Babis. Doctrinal speculation was rife. The final blow, which transformed this state of increasing chaos into one of total collapse, occurred in 1852. In Tehran, one Babi group had determined on revenge for their martyred founder. No doubt they saw the hand of God in the disgrace and subsequent murder of Taqi Khan at the Shah's instructions, that was in January 1852, and wished to punish his master in a similar way. So in August of that year, individuals associated with this group made a bungled attempt on the Shah's life. Although this was the work of only a small group, all the Babis in Tehran now became suspect. All those who could be found were arrested, and many were then tortured to death in various revolting ways. Amongst those killed, who were not involved in the plot, were Tahrir, although there was a resurgence of fighting in Nariz the following year. The Babi religion had, to all intents and purposes, collapsed, its roots torn out by its opponents. That it was to re-emerge, eventually transformed into the Baha'i Faith, was due almost entirely to the activities of Baha'u'llah, which we'll deal with in the next section. This, by the way, is a portrait of Nasiru'd-din Shah in 1854, at the very beginning of his reign, shortly after the events we've been describing. So, thank you for listening. If you like these videos, you're welcome to subscribe to my channel. I'll try to answer any questions you may have in a future video. By the way, if you want to support the development of the channel, you can do so through Patreon or PayPal. I'll give details below the video. You can also click the like button so that I can get an idea of which videos are of greatest interest to viewers. Tomorrow I will post a set of review questions on this chapter, and next week we'll move on to the second section of the book on the emergence of the Baha'i Faith. Again, thank you for listening and have a good day.